little change in the programme because unfortunately Professor Bernard Foyne is not able to be here because he's not well, but his colleague Hilde Schroeven-Deceuninck has very kindly agreed to stand in for him. So Hilde is going to talk about from recent probes towards a human robotic moon village. And I have to say that she's told me that her expertise is really more to do with Mars than the moon, but she's going to cope with things about the moon as well.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for having me. So it's a last minute change of speakers, so you will have to go along as I will go along with it. I have prepared as best as I could. But let's say the main talk the main objective of the talk is really to get to the concept of the moon village. And what we are doing nowadays in Europe, especially because I'm coming from the European Space Agency, what are the plans in place for it? What policies do we have? What technologies do we look at? And basically, how do we think one should move forward to actually come to a moon village with human and robotic exploration married together? It was an interesting question, so maybe we can come to that later on. The next one. Right, I have to do it here, right? Okay, so I guess you have been talking all day long already about the moon, so the talk starts with a picture of the moon, and I was keen to know, why are people so interested in the moon? Of course, it's the nearest object to Earth, but actually I look back in history, and it's interesting to see that the moon has always had a great attraction to the old Egyptians. If you look at paintings and whatever, and the sculptures, the moon is there. The moon has been around us for a very long time, and it's kind of very, very normal that people want to know exactly what the moon is about. So if you look at the next picture, you see all the colored dots, and I think you have been discussing the Apollo ones, the Russian ones, the Lunar ones, but also there's two recent ones that I wanted to point out here on this slide is Smart 1, because Smart 1 was the first ESA mission to go effectively to the moon as an orbiter, not as a lander, but let's say it's a first stage to acquire European expertise in how to get a thing there. Because before you go from an orbiter to a lander, there's a lot of extra technology developments you have to master. You talk about people putting there, you don't talk about a thing that potentially can crash into the surface. So when you look at Smart 1, it's 10 years ago, and it says that it touched down. It did not really touch down the way you want to put humans down. It actually crashed down, but in a controlled way. So it is interesting that has happened, because a soft touchdown is something we will need for every planetary body we want to land on, whether it's robotic landings or whether it's human landings. But the idea of Smart 1 was actually twofold. It is, of course, a scientific mission, but mainly it wanted to test new technologies to bring in the future humans on a regular basis back to the moon. And it can also be a technology that can be used for other missions, but since we talk about the moon, it's important to remember solar electric propulsion is a key propulsion technology that one should want to use to go to the moon. And why is that? We want it because you want to bring lots of kit and lots of stuff and people to the moon. So you don't want to spend all your mass on having heavy fuel tanks and things that basically won't return any signs. So Smart 1 was a technology demonstrator of what could be used, what could be demonstrated to then ultimately go in different mission scenarios to the moon and beyond. Also, it was an example of a faster, cheaper, smarter mission. It's a theme that has been used many times by the Americans, it has been used by Europe, by everybody, and it came back to one of the questions, how much will it cost? Well, one of the approaches has been faster, cheaper, smarter, and one has to prove that this is the way to go. Because when you go fast, it could also mean you could not achieve what you ultimately want, because you go overlooking maybe quality control issues. You overlook the full testing of your technology and really understanding its capabilities. This is something I'm pointing out now because it will come back later in the talk of what we do now to avoid making a mistake by trying to go fast. You need to understand exactly your technology here on Earth in a known environment where you can control things and where you especially can interject new solutions before actually declaring something ready to go to Mars or ready to go to Moon. Sorry, this may slip up a few times because usually I'm doing Mars, but I'm very keen to talk to you about the Moon. So for this point in Smart 1, it's not about talking about what does it do scientifically, in my opinion. It is what has it achieved technologically so that you can come closer to going for a moon village concept. And of course, the latest addition to go to the moon was the Russian. It was a duo, it was a lander and an orbiter, and it was a rover that went along. We know the story, but the key thing here is as well, they have tried to deploy a rover immediately. Why? Because even if you want to have humans there, you will need a rover. Whether it's a small one or a big one can debate it because it's dependent on what ultimately you want to do with the rover. But the point is, you will need something to cover distances faster, with more stuff, and locate so that you can cover more space than what you can do on foot, as was mentioned before. So this is just a few pictures. An interesting thing here that you will see in later pictures is this. Sorry, where's the laser? Yes, here. These. This is the egress ramps from the lander. You will see this come back. This may look very easy, right? If you go to the garage and they have to drive up your car to put it up, and it's very easy. You just steer and go. It's not as easy as that for a rover, especially if there are no humans around. So in terms of how challenging is it to go purely for a robotic approach of exploration, it's very challenging. It is less challenging, in my view, when you have a human around because they can always recover things. The criticality is to bring the human there in a safe way and in a repeatable way and that they can come back. But the robotic aspect is extremely challenging if it is only robots far away and the humans have to assure that everything is ready here. These ramps cause engineers a terrible headache because if the landing is not going in the softest way as designed, if the lander doesn't come down in the orientation that was foreseen, you can immediately lose your mission because the ramp doesn't open or only partly opens, your rover can't get out, etc. So as you can see, lots of challenges. And what has been done internationally is put together the Lunar Exploration Working Group, which is a big association with engineers and scientists to look at what the pathway should be to come to a moon village. I mean, this is the same, a similar equivalent exists for Mars. But what is important to notice is that you have to map out such huge blocks in technology development, in budget availability, in defining common objectives of all the people that will actually participate in those missions, and to agree a timeline for it so actually you achieve it. So you have had the robotic exploration here at the beginning with the precursor missions, orbiters, landers, rovers, etc. Then you want to go to a more permanent robotic presence just to train things before you actually send people. You also need to make use of the lunar resources because, as you heard, the Apollos were a few days. If you want to send humans for a longer time, even just think about 1 week. It's a factor of 2. It's a factor of 2 for oxygen. It's a factor of 2 for water. It's a factor of 2 for food. It's a factor of 2 for waste. It's a factor of 2 for many things, and you have to cater for it. So you have to look very early at the reutilization of what you have, but also the utilization of what you will find on the moon. And then ultimately the last thing is to go to a human outpost where you can really safely keep your people. You can protect them from the radiation, you can have sufficient food that doesn't need to be sent off, you can generate electricity all the way through, you can have medical emergencies covered, etc. So in 2001, the Aurora Program was born, and I think you have a dedicated section here in the UK on specific areas, projects that you want to look at with UK capabilities, to see how to bring the overall strategy together to bring humans beyond the low Earth orbit of the space station. And as you know, Professor Hawkins is a very strong advocate of the humankind leaving planet Earth for several reasons, and I think he is totally right about it. It's just a matter of how to do it in a safe way, and you will need adventurers and explorers to do it, but that doesn't exclude that you have to have a very solid plan to reach it. So that's why the idea of the Moon Village was born. It's very strongly advocated by our DG, Jan Werner, and it's not just about purely the science and exploration. It is about bringing a diversity of backgrounds again together to a common objective, to a common goal of reaching out. It's not about engineering only, it's not about science only, but it's about bringing also philosophy together. It's about bringing psychology sciences together, integrated with design, with art, etc. So it's really finding that common goal, like the Apollo program in the US had as a geopolitical approach, to have it more as an overall, an overarching European motivational and inspiring objective that everybody can relate to. So this is the, let's say, the overall driving mechanism behind it, to also motivate younger generations, the general public, behind something that can really everybody say, wow, this is what we want to contribute to. And we had this effect already with the Rosetta mission, as you've heard a few years ago, on landing on Sheremetyev-Yeremenko. It was captured by the general public, and especially here in the UK, it was covered continuously. What would happen? You know, it was a shame. It landed, yes, but it felt over. What could be done? Could it be saved, etc., etc. And I think the same happened with the Timpeak mission, and now with the Proxima mission, where now, as you know, Thomas Pesquet was launched a few days ago. We'll reach the space station again tonight, and it is this kind of thing that you need to find a general willingness and inspiration to move forward with the exploration. Because to come back to the question of money, it will cost a huge amount of money to go for a moon village. Like it cost a huge amount of money to build a space station. The space station is still there. It's a great objective altogether that was launched many years ago, but it has generated tons of science, and again, like the Apollo mission, it will go on for many decades to come to analyze the results and to analyze basically all the flow down in the different areas in our daily life that we can have from this. There have been many medical experiments, many life science experiments, and it's going back into medication now. It goes back into medicine. New materials have been developed, lots of tests have been done, etc., etc. And all of this comes back into our daily life. So it's something that is often forgotten maybe, that yes, space is a very costly business, but it will bring back lots of things into our daily life that people may not always recognize. It's the same with telecoms, you know, a mobile phone seems a normal thing, but you need a satellite to have it work. So all of that being said, is what is then next afterwards? Well, after the space station, we need to continue on a set of requirements that we want to have, that we must have. Human robotic microgravity lab to basically replace everything that is there. We don't want to stop it. But you want to make something that is more than a single mission, more than a single one-way journey just to the space station and back. You want to go forward. And this is how Space 4.0 came along, and basically the idea of the moon village. You may say, right, why not Mars? We will not go into that discussion today, but Mars is seen as a next destination, as the ultimate destination for human exploration. But you cannot go just like that to Mars. It is too risky, it's too far away, it's too demanding on the human body, it's too demanding on technologies as it stands. But it's not excluding that we have had Mars Express, an orbiter study globally what Mars is about. We learned a lot of things there, and it is another type of mission, but it is like the reconnaissance missions to the moon, where you had to first learn from the orbiters what's going on before you put people down. You did the same for Mars. So enough on that, but just to tell you that basically the reason for having Mars a little bit in this talk, and this was not my idea, this was Bernard Foin's idea, is to pull on synergies. We have to find a way to strengthen the technologies that have been developed for Mars and have been developed for the moon, to develop them together so that there can be benefits for both. So you know this, the ExoMars program, the 2016, the 2020, with rovers, and there you can see already the challenge. Again, the question, what do you do with a rover? If it's being stuck, what do you do with a lander that is not coming down in the controlled way that one would have hoped? It's all the same questions that need to be answered in a very, very careful way before we should attempt to bring the humans again to the moon. Just a comparison. To go to the moon, it's roughly a week. To go to Mars, you talk about 2 years minimum. And that means not a return mission, right? That's a one-way ticket to Mars. To Mars, you have all the radiation, the communication, the psychology, which is far more difficult because you're confined forever, you know it. For the moon, this may be a little bit more acceptable for a long-term stay, a more permanent base of humans. So the proposal was born with this background of having sustainable moon surface operations to not only do the science of the moon, which is of course extremely important, but have a dual objective to it. To use whatever you want to do on the moon in terms of robotic technologies, exploitation of the planet, in situ resource utilization, building structures that have not been brought in from Earth, learning how to live a long term together between a few humans without directly the possibility to come back to Earth. All of these elements in preparation for further destinations, whatever they may be. So all these elements come into play for a moon village. It's of course exploration, but it's also public and a commercial endeavor, because commercial companies may want to mine the resources that you have on the moon. Not necessarily to bring the material back to Earth, but use those materials to do 3D printing, to further build structures on the moon, or build structures that can be launched from there further on to the next destination. You have all the cosmology and astronomy research that can be done rather undisturbed from the far side of the moon. A lot of potential there. You have the whole question of how to do transportation of stuff and people on the moon. Because you can say, right, you can send 100 missions to the moon. I personally don't see that happen anytime soon. It will be a matter of having a few critical missions go to the moon and making sure that you can actually cover distances. And cover distances like going on a trek. So with a larger habitable rover unit, something like that. Communication and technology, all of that has been, you know about that. There is a lot of things that need doing, and therefore it's not something that in 5 or 10 years' time can be achieved. But we need to start now, and we need to think in an open way of how to reach it. We all have to work together, and this is a key thing. It's like the space station. You will have to bring all the world-leading agencies together, but you also have to have the public behind you. You will have to have the governments behind you. It's not like the Apollo program in that respect that you can rely on one major country to fund it and see it through. If you want a moon village, it has to be almost a world-encompassing endeavor to start working on that. And this is kind of the first stages now that we are looking at together with our counterparts in Russia and with the Americans, etc. But we should also reach out to the Chinese, the Japanese, to all these emerging space agencies to see which technologies they will want to bring on board. So the exploration destinations, as it stands now in strategy, is still low Earth orbit, Moon and Mars, with the lower destination, continuation of the space station as long as possible, currently till 2025, but hopefully beyond that, and testing as many technologies as possible that can be deployed on the Moon. So it's not that we don't have a dedicated mission to the Moon and therefore forget about doing anything in preparation for the Moon. You want to use the space station to test already, for instance, robotic arms or other elements that will be deployed on the Moon. It's also going on to the Orion, the multi-purpose crew vehicle of NASA, where Europe is also involved, and the service module to make sure that we have a vehicle to bring people to further destinations, not just to the space station, but to the Moon and beyond. This is a design to go beyond the Moon, but it has to be a regular bus service, if you can call it that way, to the Moon. So, do we do Moon things with ESA? Yes, we do. We are involved in Roscosmos collaboration with ESA on the Lunar resource, the lander, and a sample return mission. It's difficult to talk about it now because you may be aware that we have the Ministerial Council coming up in just 2 weeks from now, basically 1st and 2nd of December, where basically the strategy will be either endorsed fully, meaning all the budget, or partially, and therefore decisions will have to be made. So it is in the program, work has been done, lots of analog work is done, lots of technology work is done to go back to the Moon together with the Russians, but we have a first hurdle to pass beginning of December. So now to the Moon village. First, the deep space habitat. The deep space habitat is a critical element to enhance regular back and forth between Moon and Mars, because this would be a floating, in the Lagrange point 1, a floating equivalent of the space station basically, where the astronauts can either wait before going to the Moon or when they come back before going back to Earth, that you can keep them in a more controlled environment than just in a Moon habitat. So this is a next generation space station, but would be closer to the Moon than the space station now, obviously. Sorry, this is the wrong way. So, synergies. I mentioned it before, and this is our chart where we say you cannot go to Mars without going to the Moon. You also should not go to the Moon just for not going further. The Moon has to be considered as a major next step, a needed major next step, but not the end destination. Because there's many exciting places in our solar systems where people want to go to. There is still a very strong Moon community and a Mars community. They all want to go to both of their places. There's not enough money for it. There's not enough time to develop the technologies in a reasonable time. So we have to find technologies that help both destinations forward. So the Moon village. Has something been done except words and strategies and nice pictures, etc.? Yes. ESA and NASA have done an architectural study to see what is really needed to make a Moon village. And they have been going back to the Apollo program to understand what did the Apollo program use. Well, they had this rover, you have seen the picture in the previous talk, but we will need rovers that are far more robust than that. They need to go longer distances, they need to be able to keep the astronauts inside, to basically park out at a given place to do science. So the idea is to find a proper merge between the robotic elements of rovers, of drills, of in situ research technology with the use of an astronaut. And it may look very easy to say, okay, you have a rover and you have a person there and they will work together. It is not easy at all. The human needs to know exactly what the remit is of the rover, how he can steer it, how he can control it, how he can safely control it, how he handles it when it breaks down, and how he does it, the return back to the mother station, to the Moon village, basically. And how do you build your habitats? will you actually bring them, like it was done with the space station, as a fully built habitat? Or will you actually have to do inflatable structures that are strong enough that need protection from the radiation? You need power at all times, so therefore you'll have to be on the illuminated side of the moon, but you still want to venture out to the back side of the moon, the far side of the moon. Do you need nuclear power systems to give you heating, to give you power all the way along? But then you're very close by with a human being, so how will that interact? All of these technologies, and especially the interaction between those, is what's being studied as we speak. So this is an artist's impression of how one of those inflatable habitats, so this is an inflatable structure basically, right? This is built and launched. This is built in situ by 3D printing. And then you need a way to basically move the regolith from around it, on top of it, to protect your astronauts from radiation. So it should not be underestimated, even if you want to go just for, let's say, 2 weeks to a month to the moon, which outfit you need already to protect your astronauts. Another idea for 3D printing is, instead of bringing 3D printing with base material brought from Earth, lots of testing is going on at the moment of 3D printing with regolith. And of course we are not using the returned regolith from the Apollo missions, that would be a shame at all. But that's why there are programs put in place for finding Earth analogues that are equivalent enough in terms of geotechnical, geochemical properties to basically test the 3D printing machinery, and hopefully they shall then be working on the moon. But again, how will you validate this? You will not use it with material from the Apollo mission, so you need to have a total validation program that those technologies will work when you reach the moon and use that regolith. So what are then the overall challenges for the moon village? Well, there's plenty, right? There is, first of all, all the habitat systems, after the fact of getting there, obviously. The communication in between the different modules without having your astronauts go out all the time, but to communicate back with Earth. You have to have all the operations going. And that does not mean the operations to do science. This is the operation of the whole settlement, shall we say. It's the operation of the food production, the food preparation, the food waste. The human way of living, so the showering, the cleaning, etc. All of that, what do you do with that? You need water for it, you need air to breathe. All of that needs to be maintained. So you can see, it's like on the space station, a lot of time the astronauts will be busy just to make sure that all their systems will work. The operation of the external vehicles as well. The survival, protection from the radiation. The survival also with power and the heating keeping going. Making sure that the solar panels remain sufficiently illuminated at all times, not being dusted, etc., that there is enough power. To move around different type of vehicles, smaller ones, larger ones, etc. And then the humans with all their outfits. So all of these elements entail dozens and dozens of technologies. And all those technologies need to be developed from, not entirely from scratch, but certainly not at a level where you would want any human being, even if they are very brave, say, get off and do it. It needs years and years of testing. And it needs lots of testing in what we know here on Earth. This is a future view. This is much longer term. This is 2040s, 2050s, but it's just the artists at a given moment, they get carried away of what is achievable. I think if we have the first one there already around 3035, that will be a very good thing. And one last thing before I move on to the point of how do we do it. This is the proposal of a radio telescope on the far side of the moon. This is part of the package of having a moon village on the illuminated side of the moon, but to do science, studying the dark ages of the universe, but also looking for extraterrestrial intelligence, etc., where you're basically undisturbed from all the influences on Earth. But you can only do that when you have a base on the moon, because somebody needs to build it first, needs to maintain it, needs to operate it. This is impossible, obviously, from the Earth. So what do we do nowadays to get there? We have what we call field trials. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with the name. It's not in terms of like you go out to the field and you do geology experiments or you extract samples. It's going far beyond that. Basically, it is finding equivalent regions on Earth where you're far away, and you can have a lander model, a rover model, astronauts in suits, etc., so that they can train on all the operations and on all the elements involved. And we have many. This was one in the Eiffel area. There is another one, I'm not sure where this one was, but probably in the US somewhere. We have some in Poland. And basically, what do you look at in these field trials? You want to test your technologies. You want to test your habitat structure. You want to test the architecture and the layout of the habitat, because it may be looking great when you're on Earth and you can go out about whenever you like, but it may be totally rubbish when you're in a confined area. You have the grey water, you have the greenhouse, you have the labs that need to fit in. But you have humans, you know, and they have not necessarily chosen to be together with each other. They're chosen for their expertise, right? So how do they get on? The psychology behind it. The efficiency, how do they cope with the food restrictions? How do they cope of being confined and under very controlled regime of doing this and the other? It's a similar training that the astronauts have, but when the astronauts have it, they have a far wider range of, let's say, of movement, right? Because the space station is quite big in itself. It's not like our houses, but it's still quite big. Those habitats are very tiny, so they have to stay in there for months. And, okay, workshops, etc. I've got the 5-minute sign, but this is a very interesting one. This was done in Hawaii. And that was a mission. It was in the context of a Mars mission, but it can be as equivalent for a moon one. For 1 year, 4 people, 1 year confined in this little habitat, like there would be. Solar panels, you know, this is the inside. Get on with it. A whole scientific program, just do it. And a lot has been learned of it. What else do we have? In the European Astronaut Center, together with DLR, they are building a huge habitat with equivalent basaltic regolith in there to test the rovers that will move around. And there's academy workshops where we not only have scientists and engineers, but we get much more disciplines together. We get designers, artistic designers. We get artists there. We get psychologists there, and they all bring in their ideas of what they believe should be there for the moon village and what effects we will have. So all of that is brought together in big sessions, big discussions, jam sessions, you name it, but always with a focus. They have to, at the end, come out with a concept, e.g. of habitat or of a new rover type that can contain a habitat, etc. So all these things are going on already on a very regular basis. And this is our DG, and this is Bernard, who should have stood here before you today, but couldn't make it. Basically, he is very much endorsing the Moon Village concept. Therefore, all the programs that we now propose in exploration for the ministerial have technologies that build on the synergy of both what was done for the Moon, what was done for Mars, but with the aim to come to a habitat with people on the moon again in the foreseeable future. So we have been instructed as people working in the exploration directorate to always think, even if you have a Mars background or you're working on the technologies, it has to be useful and it has to be validated on the moon before. So this is now something that is getting more and more into the engineer's mind. We have to start thinking as the moon, not just to do science, but for us as the ultimate validation of before going further. So everything in our mind is now, it has to work on the moon. Do you develop a drill? Great, it has to work on the moon. Even if it's a drill for Mars, even if it's a drill for Phobos, it is, no, first on the moon. And then you see which delta development you need to bring it further. So all in all, inspiration and motivation is what's driving the pioneers of all times. It's the same for our last astronaut recruits. This is Samantha Cristoforetti. She's also very much in favor of the moon, but it is about inspiring so that one day, and this is it, long distance flight, not just around Earth, but can there be something that brings humans on a regular basis to the moon? So I think with that, we want to relax and enjoy planet Earth from the moon. And the key message I had to give you, keep calm and be always a moon villager. Thank you very much.
Okay, now a question here.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. I was very much looking forward to your talk. I found it really exciting. And I wanted to pick up on one of your last slides, which was the one with Astro Samantha back on Earth smelling a bunch of flowers. And I wondered whether you could tell us a little bit, if you can, about the sensory element of the mission. So it's a place that taste, smell, touch, all those kind of senses might be playing on the mission. I was talking to someone from the Royal College of Art a few weeks ago who was telling me that the pods that you are currently trialing to be part of the Moon Village had a kind of, their structure was almost like an anechoic chamber, and that one of the issues was to do with sound and the way that you could recreate an environment in which the sound wouldn't feel too alien. So perhaps if you could pick up on that and tell us a bit more about the senses.
Yes, I mean, I'm not very familiar with the pure human aspects to it, but what I know is that it has been an issue always also on the space station, and that has been very much feedback, let's say, from all the people, astronauts, cosmonauts that have been there, that the smell and the noise was absolutely tremendous, in a negative way. Besides the views, because they can look out to the planet all the time, the vision was satisfied. But the ears, the auditive and the smelling was absolutely dissatisfied as sensors. And there are quite a lot of experiments going on now, and this is mainly the astronaut center in Cologne looking into that, especially with the astronauts that have flown, to look into possibilities of materials. You know, how can you modify materials in a safe way that maybe they can give us some smell. But then the question is, smell is a type of off-gassing, right? If you think about smell as an engineer, this is an off-gassing process. So you need to know which molecules come off and how this will affect all the other senses, the engineering senses, the scientific senses around you. So this is, again, one of the dilemmas to look at making the human environment, let's say, better for the human, but you may risk introducing extra sources of problems, really, that you have to cater for from an engineering point of view. So I'm very sure that they are doing lots of experiments now to understand which molecular composition are pleasant to the nose and are not damaging to, let's say, to all the mechanisms that are around there. And that takes a study in itself. But thank you for the question. It just shows you, you know, a small thing like smell, what the implications are. And that is the reason why things getting so long in development and so expensive, because you cannot just say, oh, let's have some, you know, have these airwick kind of things take along. Because no, it will be a no-go from a safety point of view from the engineering side. So I hope that somehow answers your question.
So thank you again very much for your talk. You mentioned that a lot of experiments have now been done where people have been living in close quarters for a year or so, and you say you've learned a lot about all the experiments you've done. I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on what has been learned, and particularly the difficulties of unrelated people living together for so long in such a confined space?
Yes, so those kind of studies have been ongoing since many, many decades, and they have been started in the time when the International Space Station actually would be building up. And in the very early days of those tests, it was more about, let's say, the efficiency of the people that they were after, the performance of the people under stress in a confined environment. And the psychology at that time had been totally ignored and underestimated. So as people looked at those data, basically the engineering performance had to, in a way, give way to give way to the psychology that was not recognized at all, and I can speak for ESA in that respect. Psychology was not recognized as a discipline that we would need in space. So now there's quite a lot of dedicated psychology experiments that are developed, not just for the ground, let's say, ground simulators, but also for the space station. And basically the outcome of it has been that the requirements that are requested, the psychology test of astronauts, have been a direct consequence of the results of those psychological analyses. So basically the first feed-in has been into the recruitment process of the astronauts. But we are not there yet, because they're all, you know, it's a different setting, and at the moment they are defining now, together with the astronauts, what other tests they have to do, which parameters psychologically they have to look at, and how they will be able to measure it in a person up front who basically has never been confronted with these things, and how many preparatory confinement sessions they need to do in order to really extract all the psychology out of it. Yeah? Thank you.
This is indeed inspiring. But we have 120 million Europeans living in poverty, and we have 2 billion people who have less than £1.50 a day to live on. Can planet Earth afford to eradicate poverty and build a village on the moon? And if not, what do we say to the 2 billion people about their survival, compared with attempts to get 20 people to survive on the moon?
Very interesting question, but a difficult one to answer, as you may imagine. The only thing I can say is, whether you live in, it's very bad, first of all, that so many people live in poverty, that's for sure. But it has to be a political will of all leaders on Earth to solve that issue. The issue of going to the moon and going to Mars is not a decision that is taken at the highest political level to move on. The only thing that we see is that inspiring people and motivating people to develop technologies and learn about other places and bring that back to our society on Earth, for us to develop maybe more encompassing ways of treating each other, that would be a real good benefit. And I think our astronauts, at least from ESA, have always been inspired to do so, to motivate others and see how they can bring their expertise back into every level of society. But space could not be excluded to just help out poverty. I think it's 2 different levels of political willness that has to exist and can totally coexist. I don't think that the budget from space exploration would be sufficient in itself to eradicate all poverty. And let's not forget not just poverty, but maybe war, and maybe religious anti-positions, etc. So I don't know what the real answer is, but I can only say from the European Space Agency, I'm a very proud member to be a member of their staff, and we always try to have the best intention for all people on Earth, whether they are Europeans or not. We want to bring technologies that bring better life on Earth.
Okay. Another one to back there.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on this, because I think it's a really important point. I think one thing that space can do, as I tried to say, is provide perspective. Right? This is a geopolitical benefit, seeing us all on this small planet, which might help us work more closely together. And I think space agencies can be justly proud that this is a positive good. It might cost a lot, but it provides a perspective on humanity, which may result in positive choices elsewhere. The other thing is just on the cost. Of course, none of the cost of space exploration is spent in space. The money isn't put into rockets and fired off to the moon. All of that money is spent employing people on the Earth and driving the economies on the Earth, which provides economic benefit. And the other thing is just the sheer quantity involved. I mean, this planet spends about 100 times as much building weapons to fight itself with as it does to explore space. So this is where a bit of perspective might help. If we saw ourselves as a little pale blue dot, maybe it's a bit silly to be spending what is 100 times the cost of space exploration just arming ourselves against ourselves. And I think this perspective is something that space exploration can help drive home.
Yes, there's somebody over there in the darkness.
Come into the light. Yes, thank you very much for that. I'm with the Department of Education here at the university, so my question is along those lines. Such an inspiring vision. And I wondered, it's a great topic for a curriculum, and I wondered whether there were some structures whereby we can educate our children, because it's such a long-term project. And secondly, whether you'd thought about the schooling system on the moon.
Well, if the moon village materializes with all the ideas that people have, for sure education should be an element of it. And I don't see why that should be very complicated in itself. I mean, if you think about the last missions of the astronauts to the space station, there have been many initiatives, especially for the Tim Peake mission, to have many schools have initiatives and competitions and actually have direct lines to the space station, etc. Make your own small rocket design or whatever, but just to get them very inspired about it from early stage on. And it's key that this is continued to be done, and I think it's something that you don't need a moon village for. Let me put it in the other way. You can't say you have to wait for the moon village to have the education. I think the education has to come now already, what we have, and continuously inform the kids of what's going on types of different missions and bringing astronauts to the space station, and that this is the next step for their generation to materialize. So, but the education in itself, for sure there can be in the habitats, I mean there will be links with Earth, etc. So it could be the same approach as you do for the space station, dedicated experiments by schools, you know, to go on board and then all the way to the moon village and make growing experiments of plants, for instance, or anything like that, that they do on a short time scale or on limited possibilities now for the space station to do the same on the moon village. But I think it's a responsibility that we all should take as adults, whether you're in the education system or not. But if you're inspired about space, to actually talk about it with the youngsters, with young people around you, to make them understand that engineering and science is not boring. You need it. It's a basis. It's a language to actually do exciting stuff like this.
What is your take on these proposed one-way missions to the Mars and to the Moon from some of these private enterprises that people are queuing up to be the first person to set foot on the planet knowing they won't ever get back?
Well, I think the first thing about the commercial private enterprises, I think, in my view, and this is a personal view, this is not an official ESA view, it's a very good thing. Because it challenges people to think and work in different ways that are not bound by overruling, overstating whatever security and safety that can bind us down on not doing a thing. So it's a great thing to break through the walls of, limited thinking. The one-way ticket issue, that's a different story. There, I think, we were just touching upon war. People consider this, although they don't want to officially recognize it, but this could potentially always be a one-way ticket. So I think you can find enough adventurers and people that really want to try it out for the first time, like in the 1400s and 1500s, not knowing what's going to happen if you ever make it back. I think you will always find those people. Now, the process of how to put that in place is a different story. How will you really ensure that people fully understand, to the last point, that it is a one-way ticket? And I think the one-way ticket for the moon is less difficult because you can easily make the moon a return ticket, right? For Mars, it is really at the moment a one-way ticket. And that's the question. Do you want to go for the one-way ticket in that case? Or do you want to acquire first your knowledge to go have a return ticket for the moon so that you enable a potential, at least, for a return ticket for Mars?
Thank you. Okay, we'll take one last question.
I just want to go back to the point, the political aspect of the whole thing. This has to be a global exercise, yes?
Yes.
Not just ESA, but other organisations. And I see NASA and ESA and other organisations putting things on the internet, making things available, educating people, showing people what's going on. Brilliant stuff. And then you see the news element, which a larger group of the population are going to see. The less interested, the ones who don't want to go to a website, but just want something over evening meal. And then you see the media's slant on things, the sort of way they jump on failure and not on success. And then you go further away, then you progress further to poverty, yes, people, next meal, where it's coming from, but don't have a television set, don't have the internet. And these are all people, a very part of a big pyramid. It's got to build up to the peak of support for this kind of project. So what can you do to the people who wouldn't naturally go to the internet, or can't go to the internet, or can't even go to a television set, to get them on board, get their support? They may be disenfranchised religiously, or politically, or economically. What would you do as part of NASA, and ESA and other organisations?
Yes, I think it's very difficult to reach all the time, all the levels of population, if indeed there is either no possibility or no willingness. I mean, in case of the no willingness, I think this is an element that you have to not cater for in the end, because if people don't want to hear about it, you can't obviously force it onto them. But I think a lot could be done in coming out more into events that are freely available. We don't see a lot of that happening. I don't know if the US does it, but for sure in Europe, not a lot of things happen where you can attract anybody basically from the streets and inform them, have not necessarily a big exhibition, but talks about, look what dreams can be, what can be done, combining it with maybe universities, with high schools, where youngsters are already motivated and make projects for them to show it to the public, to engage with the public. I think for me it's a matter of engaging, and we don't see enough of the engaging effort. It often has to be a paid effort for the organizers or whatever, and I think one of the things could be that you go into a more much more open-minded, coming out of the box, coming out of the shell approach, if you see what I mean. Not just saying, oh, this is ESA. No, this should be all of Europe, or all of the world even, to have joint initiatives taken where, for instance, these workshops that you see, right? These workshops are always aimed at engineers and scientists, which is great, which was a need. But what if you do these type of workshops for people that have just general interests and are very keen on knowing for space? Learn them about some things, basics. You won't tell them about the formulas and whatever behind it, but you will tell them and say, look, this is why we need this, because, like the smell thing. This is why you can't put necessarily this air with things in, because it will have this and this as an effect. Then people start to understand a bit, and I think if you have a basic understanding through asking questions, you will get them more engaged and more informed, etc. So I think a new format of engaging on a voluntary basis it will have to be, but also in a kind of, let's say, basic language approach, rather than the pure scientific language and the pure engineering language, but just, talk about what the future could potentially be.
I think the biggest challenge may be the people who are negative rather than people who are disinterested. Who've got political or religious or whatever reasons for not being part of this. And that's going to be a real challenge.
Yes, but I think in the end we have to be positive, you know, and the people that are positive about it can only take out the positive message. You cannot reprogram people's mind, they have to be convinced by themselves.
Okay, I think we need to leave it here because we're getting nervous about the coffee break.